I was gonna say I'll side with that compromise, but it seems a little fucked up to say in the morning.
Ooh. Yeah, and like if there gets to a point where like we need more, same concept, we have to lie.
Thanks. This will probably last me like a good 3 rounds, I'll be honest.
This is here. Actually, yeah. Okay, is anyone not ready? Observation 1 is resolutional analysis. First, you should find everything contextual. If you have a question, ask us. Second is that you should evaluate the run-through net benefits. Next is the background. First is that the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was signed into law by President Obama in 2010 as a response to the late 2000 recession. The law is known as the most significant change to financial regulation since measures passed in response to the Great Depression. Second is that the act is aimed at making changes to financial regulatory environment that would affect all federal financial regulation agencies in every part of the nation's financial services industry. And the plan text is the United States federal government should reform the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act to ease compliance burdens on community banks and credit unions by exempting them from the cap on debit swipe charges. So the USFG should reform the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act to ease compliance burdens on community banks and credit unions by exempting them from the cap on debit swipe charges. Next is the advantage. A is the uniqueness. First is that community banks and small credit unions have been negatively affected by Dodd-Frank Act now. A study from Harvard tells us that community banks and credit unions are holding small community banks and credit unions holding under $10 billion in assets have been negatively affected by these new regulations, and their share of assets have dropped by over 12%, which is a massive amount for small banks in general. This means that the Dodd-Frank Act has capped the amount that banks can charge retailers for debit swipes and forced them to cover their losses by ending things like free checking for lower end clients, and that means that these clients are going to flee to bigger banks because they can still offer things like free checking. Second is that a study from Forbes tells us that small banks were had little to no cause of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, but have taken the brunt of the blow. So even though they weren't the cause of financial crisis, not even close to something that could be considered a cause, they're still taking massive hits because of it. Third is that this caused a decline of small banks, which are critical to local community building. This is because big banks are not opening up in place of these new banks, according to the Federal Reserve. So big banks are not opening new branches in these smaller communities after these banks close. That simply means that there are less banks, which means it's harder for people to get loans to do things like starting small businesses, and it means there's been a massive decrease in investment in these rural communities. Next is the solvency. First is that removing this cap means that small banks will once again become profitable and start and be able to charge for large debit card usage. So what this charge is actually doing is saying when you buy something that costs a lot of money, that's when you get charged for using your debit card, right? So it's like you get charged $1 when you make a purchase that's $100 or something like that. So it's just enough for them to remain profitable, but it's not them taking advantage of anything. Second is that this allows them to once again grant things like free checking, which draws people back into the small banks, because when free checking and other things like this are still available, that makes them just as desirable as big banks would, and that's the reason why they switch over in the first place, is to gain these free incentives. And third is that this incentivizes small banks to start springing up again, because they realize that they will be able to draw in more customers and not just be crowded out by the bigger banks. Next are the impacts. First is that a collapse of small banks kills local economies. This is a warrant for this is that there was a decline in the number of small businesses opened up last year because there are simply no loans for them to be able to open small businesses. If these small banks in rural communities cannot offer loans and are going out of business, and bigger banks just aren't going in to fill this gap, no loans can be given and these small businesses can't continue to pop up. And the Wall Street Journal said that rural America is what is dragging back the economic recovery, because they are not growing well enough and fast enough with regards to urban areas. Second is that a continued collapse will lead to a collapse in small business confidence because that means that they won't be able to get loans to stay afloat, they won't be able to get loans to open up, and they won't be able to invest the amount of money that they normally invest because these small banks can no longer take these because these small banks are going out of business, they won't be able to invest to try and increase their profit margin to again stay afloat. This is important because the majority of Americans are employed by these small businesses and those jobs will simply disappear. Also because small businesses are the largest drivers keeping the economy afloat. As we see these starting to drop off, we also see our economy on the decline. So third, is that this leads to a collapse of U.S. economy because when all these small banks not only can't stay afloat, but also we cannot open anymore, they are going to lead to a crash in the economy because of how many U.S. citizens that they, or because of how many people that they employ, and because of how many people they employ, and because of how much of a driving factor they are for the economy, and that leads to a global economic collapse because the U.S. is so closely tied financially to so many other nations. Our economy collapsing vastly affects theirs, and they will no longer be able to stay afloat either, which leads to fourth, which is resource wars, because these great powers will no longer be able to trade like by financial means. They still want to be able to get their commodities and oil and food and things like that, so they are going to think the only way they can get that is to go to war with people because we can no longer do it financially, which means we will start using things like nuclear weapons because when it's a great power war, we think that's the only way that we can overtake other nations. When we start using things like nuclear weapons, then that will lead to massive nuclear fallout, which will kill a majority of the population, and then even after that, the radiation will cause genome mutation and mean that we can no longer repopulate effectively, which will lead to human extinction.
The order is 3 off. Case in the order of the plan text, and then the advantage.
Can you sign first when you get to the impact so I know to flip?
Yeah.
Thank you.
A is the interpretation. The affirmative must textually specify the process in which the Dodd-Frank Act is reformed. The affirmative must textually specify the process in which the Dodd-Frank Act is reformed. B is the violation. There is no textual specification of the reform. The C argument is the standards. The first argument is predictable ground in a world in which they do not textually specify. This means we lose out on links to politics disadvantages, which are uniquely key on the process in which an act is reformed. But the next argument is limits. The team that limits the most limits best, because in a world without limits, this means any affirmative can use any process which would allow them to spike out of literally any other dissents in the MGC. But the next argument is voters. The first voter is for fairness in education, because in a world in which we do not have fairness, this means we do not have classrooms. Means in a world in which we do not have classrooms means we do not get links to our dissent, which kills our specific topic-specific education. Finally, competing interpretations. I want you to evaluate this debate on the standards level. Politics. A is the uniqueness. The AUMF will pass in the status quo. The first argument is that McConnell is pushing for AUMF passage. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's fast-tracked a broad authorization for the use of military force authority by Senator Lindsey Graham to the Senate calendar last week. The second argument is that the bill has bipartisan support. Apart from Lindsey Graham, the bill has 3 other Republican co-sponsors. Daniel Coates, Joni Ernest, and Orrin Hatch. Key Democrats support the bill, as well, most notably Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin, Robert Mendez, and Tom Kean. The third argument is that the bill has the best chance for White House approval. White House spokesman Brandy Hoffing stated last week that we certainly welcome Republicans taking an interest in specifically authorizing force against ISIS. The fourth argument's passage is tenuous. It relies on Congress avoiding partisan amendments. Lieutenant General David Barrero, former U.S. commander in Afghanistan, indicated that the growing threat of ISIS demands an AUMF to be passed, but partisan amendments could derail passage. B is the plan causes a derailment from the AUMF. The first argument is that the plan is a Democrat win and emboldens Democrats to call for a more restrictive legislation. The little A argument is that the PMC is a liberal win that is highly contentious and crushes bipartisan support. Specifically, Hillary Clinton has made multiple statements about why doing exactly the affirmative case and amending reforming the AUMF is uniquely key to reforming America's economy. This would be seen as a Democrat win, but the B argument is that Hillary specifically wants us, and she's made multiple statements during the last Democratic presidential debate in which she isolated that we must reform the Dodd-Frank Act. The The C argument is that this when garners legislative momentum to overturn existing languages will be used to call for more restrictive wording of the resolution forbidding the deployment of ground troops in the AUMF, which is uniquely key, and we will isolate that in a world in which we will not have the ability to deploy ground troops. This means we will absolutely lose the fight against ISIS. The C argument is the internal link. The first argument is that absent authorization and international coalition response to ISIS will be impossible. Lieutenant General David Barreras called the AUMF a potential game changer in defining future United States strategy with allies. Absent a strategic outline, coalitions will not be possible because no one will simply want to work with the United States. But the second argument is that ISIS is the #1 threat to Middle East stability. We can look to an article, we can look to a study from the Cato Institute, which they isolate that ISIS is one of the largest threats because not only do they have the ability to destabilize an entire area, but they are now gaining access to weaponry which will allow them further destabilization tactics. The third argument is that other terrorist groups have supported them. We can look to both Rahman al-Shabaab, in which both terrorist organizations have outright stated that the goals of ISIS are actually good, and they support the actions of ISIS, which has led to an arms exchange between the two terrorist organizations, which functionally has created a network of terrorist organizations. The D argument is the impact is war. The first argument is that ISIS violence destabilizes the region. We can look to Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Israel in a world in which ISIS is allowed to go unbound. This means that they will continue that these countries will take military actions, will further destabilize the region. However, we isolate that in a world in which these countries all use military action, and the other great powers will inevitably be asked to be involved, such as the United States and China, because they have economic, strategical interests within the region, which makes great power more inevitable. Additionally, we isolate that miscalculation is also inevitable because countries will act like they're literally an accidental skirmish between the United States and China blows up into a great power war, which causes extinction because these nations both are matched conventionally in terms of war, which means the use of nuclear weapons is inevitable. And once the nuclear taboo is broken, this makes nuclear extinction inevitable because the dust particles go into the air, block out the sun, we do not grow food and all die. BizCon. The A argument is that small businesses are high in the status quo. The first argument is that small businesses are increasing the status quo. We can look to a study that said from the Small Business Optimism Index that said the last month the small business confidence index decreased by 0.2%. But the second argument is that the labor market is increasing in the status quo. The labor market bounced back strongly in December as employers added 271,000 jobs, which caused the unemployment rate to ultimately fall. The third argument is that consumer credit jumped. The Wall Street Journal found in the last month that consumer credit has ultimately spiked, which demonstrates that not only are small businesses be more confident because more individuals will actually be able to purchase goods from these businesses, but consumers themselves are actually more confident because they are engaged in the economy more. But the fourth argument is that the United States confidence is still positive. The world's economic downturn isn't actually affecting the United States GDP, and so the United States is not feeling the pressure that the rest of the world is in terms of economic strength. Additionally, the same Wall Street Journal article found that the world economic downturn is not affecting the United States economy as much as originally indicated. The fifth argument is, however, this economic growth is tenuous because a chief economist at the IHS, Neiman Brevhurst, stated that the economy is still unstable to the point in which any small economic downturn could create massive economic recession across the United States. We just need one policy to derail that. The B argument is that the plan kills business confidence. The first argument is that industry association. We argue that banks in the status quo prey on small businesses. The compliance burden, you changing the compliance burden, only allows this to continue to happen because you're restricting the ease that these banks can put on businesses, which ultimately hurts business confidence. But additionally, we isolate that your plan decreases the ability of investors to actually predict the free market because regulations are ultimately unpredictable, which means investors will not invest in businesses because you change economic conditions enough with your regulations to make it unpredictable. But the next argument, the next argument is that any big regulation, specifically on banks, creates the perception that major banks will no longer be able to engage in trade. But additionally, one of the biggest links to business confidence is the fact that you actually steal business away from these larger banks, which actually hurts major business confidence because the major businesses draw their money from these banks, which means that the banks would change their policies and actually hike up rates, which means that these larger businesses would have to pay more to actually bank there. But the argument is the internal link, a loss of business confidence collapses the economy. The first argument is that business confidence is key to the United States economy because it's absolutely key to investor and consumer confidence. Because if businesses are not confident, investors won't be investing into the businesses, and consumers will no longer actually be purchasing from these businesses, which means that the businesses themselves will further compound their confidence. We isolate that this leads to the United States economic collapse because the U.S. will no longer continue to grow, but actually begin to shrink. This turns 100% of the case because in a world in which business confidence collapses and the United States economy collapses, This means their impacts of their advantage are inevitable. Additionally, we will isolate that this happens first, because by the time these small businesses, small banks will be able to regain their economic status and get all these people in, business confidence will have already gone down. It means that happens first. Case. On the plan text, our first argument is you trade off focus with the FDIC. The A argument is that focus on FDIC reforms are occurring in the status quo. Specifically, Congress is now paying higher attention to how FDIC operates and how we can further protect consumers and ultimately prevent banks from abusing the FDIC. But the second argument is that the plan shifts the focus away from this, meaning that FDIC is no longer reformed, which means the impact of this is in any instance of economic crisis, banks will enact policies that loopholes which will allow them to get around FDIC, which will allow them to keep individuals from actually getting their money out of their banks, because they can just simply say, well, you can't remove your money due to FDIC policy, which turns the case causes consumer confidence to go down. But on the case itself, our first argument is the turn you cause a big bank backlash, because big banks will ultimately use Congress to backlash against this, because this ultimately hurts them at the end of the day, which causes big banks just to simply barrel along.
Cool. The order is going to be the spec argument, then I want the politics, or rather the AUMF, BizCon, case in the order that they just went. So I'll touch on the trade-off turn on the plan text, and then the BizCon, or the big bank. All right, is everyone good?
On the specification, counter-interpretation, I do not need to specify the process by which it's going to be reformed. I do not need to specify the process by which it's going to be reformed, but because we specify normal means coming out of the PMC. But the second argument is that you say predictability. However, we are the most predictable in this round, because by specifying normal means, that is allowing you to pick the process by which the USFG is going to implement the plan, meaning that you can literally come in here with anything and you, if anything, control the predictability link in this debate. The second argument that you say is limits. However, one limits are bad for debate, because it's always going because if we were always voting for the team that's always going to construe limits, and I can come in here and just read 8 minutes or 7 minutes or 6 minutes of specification arguments, because the PMC is 7 minutes, and then only 1 minute of actual argumentation, and then just no link out of everything you say, because I get hyper specific in the PMC. That is why normal means allows for the best debate. But next to the counter standard is debatability. If I come up here and just try to specify everything, and if you're telling me that I have to specify everything, then you're completely going to kill debatability, because I can come up here and specify something you've never heard of, and that's going to no link out of every single dissent or critique that you're going to read. But the second argument that I want is ground, because we are key to ground, because if we don't specify anything, then that is allowing the negative ground. If we just come up here and specify literally everything, then that's going to mean that if we allow a specificity argument, it justifies other spec arguments, which means that it's going to completely kill net ground, because I can once again just come up here and specify something you never heard of, and then all your arguments are null. On your voters, you say fairness. However, I would argue that we're the most fair in this round, because one, you never asked a question as to what exactly we're as to what we were specifying. The point of inquiry is coming out of the PMC check. You didn't even ask when you could have checked, and we would have told you normal means, by which you then could have defined whatever you wanted. But also second, on fairness, reasonability checks, because if you believe, okay, look, reasonability, nobody specifies in the PMC any sort of implementation. The spec arguments are just bad for debate. But the second argument I want is on education. We're the most educational for this round, because of the fact that since we are not specifying, you are allowed to come up here in the LOC and say, we should have specified you, but one, you didn't give another example of what exactly we could have used instead, meaning that you're not providing any sort of education basis that the affirmative is not in this round. But second, we are key to education, because of the fact that we are actually talking about what could happen, as opposed to what necessarily will happen, because none of us are actually congressmen or policymakers. On competing interpretations, reasonability checks that. I believe our interpretation is best. I'll get you in a minute. I'll believe our interpretation is best because of the
Reasonability.
What
is your definition of reasonability?
Reasonability is that if we are reasonably, okay, look, if reasonability is, just think about it, no PMC ever specifies anything that you're talking about coming out of the LOC. If you're going to penalize us for that, then no affirmative would ever
Also,
win.
we're predictable. Also, we ask.
Yeah, also we're predictable, and you could have asked us a question. That's the reasonability argument. On the politics, first off, on your reading is one, Mitch McConnell has pointed out that there will be no major vote until the election, and that meaning that there's going to be absolutely no Republican support. That means because even if this is going to be, even if your whole scenario is true, then the time frame by which this is actually going to happen is next year, meaning that we still have all this time to actually try to do something, meaning that our impacts are completely going to supercharge this and completely change the scenario of the DISAT, because it's a completely different world than the thing you're talking about. But the second, your entire level is predicated on how Hillary wants the plan. However, Hillary's going to win in the 2016 election. The first is that the Democrats are going to win 2016. Moody's Analytics has predicted. Moody's Analytics is a study that is predicted that has accurately predicted the election election since Reagan's victory in 1980. And it shows that the Democrats are going to have 326 electoral votes to the Republicans 212. In 2012, they had a 90% success rate with every single state, and they had a similar success rate since 1980. But also the PPP at Fordham University's top study for 2012 election says that 0 Republicans are going to be able to match Hillary on a face-to-face competition. But the next argument is that the Center for American Progress even shows that even minorities come back in 2004 and vote in the record that they had in 2004, where most Hispanics and African Americans voted for Republicans. It is not going to be enough to sway the Democrats. That is because the second argument, Obama's popularity is continually decreasing, but it is enough. Obama only has 46% approval rating, but he still has over 50% approval rating with minority groups. And the X and Generation X voters and African Americans are always going to pull that toward the Democratic side, meaning that meaning that Hillary is always going to win, meaning that your Democrat becomes meaning your dissat becomes either inevitable or not impacted. But the third argument is that the voter turnout is always going to lead to Democrats because 77% of 18 to 34-year-olds plan to vote in 2016. Only 26% of those people are going to vote Republican. Your elite level is entirely predicated on the Democrats wanting a plan. Well, guess what? If you don't pass the plan right now, then it's going to pass in 2016 anyway. It makes the dissent kind of unavoidable, especially whenever you don't give an alternative advocacy. On the internal link level, you say that without the AUMF, we're not going to be able to respond back to ISIS. However, that is complete bogus. Little one here is that the United States is already responding back to ISIS after the AUMF system because of the fact that we are already targeting different types of individuals in Syria that are deemed a high threat to the United States, high threat to the stability of the region. But also the second argument is that other powers are always going to check this whenever we have people like Russia and Poland and Germany always like coming into Syria and fighting against ISIS, and that's always going to be able to check back for the United States. You don't ever specify why exactly the United States is key. You're just arguing like the AMF is key to solve back for it, but I would argue that the status quo solves. The next argument, however, is you say that ISIS is the number one threat to stability. That's cool. You don't really solve for it either. The affirmative shows that other people are key to it. Do I need anything else on that? You say other terror groups support them. That's not really a warrant for like why exactly the plan doesn't do that. That's just showing how the ISIS is getting it. Yeah, it's a matter of whenever you get to the politics dissent, we are winning on time frame and predictability because Democrats are already going to pass the plan regardless in 2016, and we're going to be able to solve back for our impacts before you solve back for your dissent. And since we change the world that your dissent happens, it's pretty unpredictable. On the BizCon. On the BizCon versus I want you to crossfire our uniqueness one, showing how the small banks decreased last year by roughly 12% solely because of the swipe charges that were allocated to that. And since you do not specify any specific reason for why this entire uniqueness scenario is happening, we control the internal link to this dissat because you are not even acknowledging the reason why this dissat is a problem in the first place. We would argue that is because of the debit swipe problem that we highlighted coming out of the PMC, meaning that your link scenario is complete bogus, especially whenever you go to it. Actually, that's really all I need because you don't really specify any sort of uniqueness argument except for like except for the economy is increasing. You say economic increase is tenuous, however, I would argue the plan solves that and cross by solvency there. I believe that you conceded that on the case. But the second argument goes on the link level. You say that the banks are preying on small businesses. However, I want you to cross apply the first solvency that we have, showing you how whenever we lift this cap, small banks are going to be able to become profitable, and that's actually going to allow these businesses to have trust in small banks. That means the banks are not going to be able to like prey on small businesses because we're lifting that cap. The reason they're able to prey on it is because of the status quo. This is a direct link turn to your impacts because we were able to solve back for the collapse of the economy and solve back for this entire BizCon scenario you're highlighting because of the fact that just think about it. In the status quo, businesses don't have confidence because they can't trust the banks. You know why that is? It's because of the problem in the PMC. Whenever we solve back for that coming out of the PMC, your dissat is null on the internal link level. The only thing I want you to cross by the plan solvency. We solve 100% for business confidence whenever we allow businesses to start. Second, the plan is able to control the internal link to the dissat because without the loans that we're highlighting, businesses won't even exist. That probably means that BizCon doesn't exist. But also, you don't really articulate why exactly the affirmative is necessarily a key. That makes the affirmative a try or die scenario since we control the internal link to the dissat. On the case proper, you say trade-off FDI CDA. Two things. One, a lot of your warrants on this are especially blended. The only one that you really get here on the plan shifts the focus away from reforming. However, I have no clue what you're talking about. Especially whenever you cross by the analysis that you have from the dissat, you're going to show you that politics are always focusing on things like business confidence. Even your other dissat on business confidence shows that politics is always centering around it. We're not pulling focus away from any of this, especially whenever the scenario that you're predicating yourself off of why exactly we do that is the scenario of the affirmative. I'm not necessarily aware of like what exactly your link scenario here. There's no link there. But also, we're able to solve back for that whenever you go to the case solvency. You say that we're going to cause a big bang backlash. However, I would argue that the big banks are the problem, especially the big banks are the problem, that the small banks are inherently key. The reason for that is whenever you send across the third uniqueness that we have is showing how the big banks are not opening banks in small areas. You completely can see that, showing how the big banks are always going to be a worse alternative for any sort of given situation. Big banks are not interested in small areas. I come from Paris, Texas, a dainty little town in Texas. I have First Federal Community Bank. I don't even know what that is anymore because we don't have a Chase, we don't have a Wells Fargo, we literally have nothing where I come from. Big banks really don't care about small areas, and if that were to go under, then the entire link scenario of the affirmative is conceded, meaning you vote affirmative on the resource wars because you conceded.
The order is going to be spec argument in the business confidence dissent case.
Sorry, spec,
Discon case. Politics. Is everybody ready? The affirmative has lost its faith because they don't understand the politics story. This is already being brought to the Senate floor this week. This means that this is not going to pass next year. This is going to pass now, which means that you are the only thing that can possibly derail this, which leads to the impacts that are external to the affirmative and outweigh it. But now, going on to the spec argument. You can just extend their counter-interpretations. They don't need to specify. There's no offense on here, which means that you're going to be voting on that as a piece of paper. On the BizCon dissent, even though we aren't going to be going for the full dissent, I need two arguments, or three arguments actually. The first argument is that the labor market has shown that 271,000 jobs have been added in the last few months, as well as unemployment rate is at 4.8%, which is the lowest in 8 years. This means that there's at least somewhat of a suspect uniqueness argument to their uniqueness argument, which is that at least businesses have some sort of confidence in the status quo. The next argument that I want is that consumer credit is going up. They don't answer this, which means that consumer confidence is going up in the status quo, which means that their uniqueness claims are suspect, but it also means that banks are able to give out credit in the status quo, which means that regardless of their arguments, they are still not going to be able to win on the internal link analysis, that small businesses are somehow going to lead to a larger economic collapse. But the last argument that I need is that you steal business away from larger banks, which means that they will have to hike rates, which will lead to a decrease in investor and business confidence. This means that these larger banks won't be able to give out loans at decreased rates to be able to give to larger businesses, which means that even if you have small business arguments, then that still means that you decrease business confidence on the whole, because larger businesses are still keeping business confidence of larger businesses as well as smaller businesses, because smaller businesses interact with those larger businesses, which means on the whole you decrease business confidence, which turns the case. But really what's important here is the politics argument, but you can still use that as a turn-on case, on the case. He just says that he doesn't understand our FDIC arguments, but what we are indicating is that FDIC reforms are already coming in the status quo, and you shift the focus because the FDIC is going to be basically doing your plan because they do all federal regulations, which means that when they are able to focus and look at the reforms in the status quo, then they are able to hamper down on these loopholes that we are talking about in our argument, which allows these big banks to be able to take advantage of people. And since you have already conceded that you are allowing a big bank backlash to be able to occur, then that just amplifies that argument, because that leads to business confidence going down, because that allows these big banks, since they are able to backlash, to be able to hike rates and take advantage of people even more, because the FDIC reforms won't be able to be focused and won't be able to actually do anything like we talk about. So even if you don't understand this, it still links, because you are basically taking away focus from these reforms that are occurring in the status quo. The next argument, I'm just going to put some defense on your internal link analysis, that you say that rural America is already not growing the status quo. You do not make any indication that you're going to be able to help economic activity within these areas. You just say that these banks are going to be able to charge on large purchases. I'm going to ask you, what sort of large purchases do these rural Americans actually make if they don't have any money, which means that there is no indication that these banks are actually going to be able to get any of this money that you are able to talk about. Also, there is no actual logical argument that leads to a complete economic collapse because these small banks collapse. If they are already hurting so much in the status quo, there is no brink argument to that, which is why you are just going to believe the AUMF story that we have put, which is much more specific. But now going on to politics. Your only argument is that time frame is that this will happen next year. This is just not true. And our first argument is that Mitch McConnell has already fast-tracked authorization of military force from Senator Lindsey Graham in the status quo and has brought it to the Senate floor for debate. Also, according to a Newsweek article, this is one of the 5 largest things that Congress is going to talk about this term. When Obama met with McConnell at the beginning of this term, they talked about what the biggest problems are, and the AUMF was one of those because of the threat of ISIS. Next argument that I want you to extend is how both Republicans and Democrats are endorsing this bill, specifically Robert Menendez, Senator Whip Dick Durbin, as well as, who is the other one?
Tim Kaine.
Tim Kaine have all come out in support of this, which means that this has bipartisan support that it already meets in the status quo. All Republicans have already come out in support of this. It's only a question of how much Democratic momentum that they can actually get to be able to support this. And we would indicate that since your plan actually emboldens Democrats, and that will lead to them changing, which doesn't allow the AUMF to be able to pass. Also, this has already gotten White House approval, which is one of the only things that has gone against this, because Republicans have said that if Obama doesn't support this, then we will not pass it. But it's already garnered White House approval, which means that only your plan gives Obama and Democrats the confidence to be able to go against this AUMF. The next argument that I want you to extend is the link analysis, that his only argument against this is that Hillary is already going to win next year. That does not matter in a world in which you allow this to be able to happen now, because the emboldenment of Democrats happens in the status quo, because Hillary Clinton has been harping on this for a long time and has said that she supports the Dodd-Frank Act, but also this is just a historically Democratic policy, which means that this is going to lead to legislative momentum, which is our second link, which talks about how this will lead to them changing the rhetoric within the AUMF, which doesn't allow ground troops to be able to go overseas, which is what we say is key to being able to defeat ISIS. Your arguments about 2016 don't matter when this happens now. Your argument about voter turnout also doesn't matter, because according to a Stanford University study, gerrymandering will not allow Democrats to be able to ever take back the House again, which means that this doesn't even mean that this is going to be inevitable. Hillary Clinton cannot just executive order this. This has to be able to go through Congress, which means that this is not inevitable. Only your affirmative plan is going to be able to do this. The AUMF has both sides of the aisle going for this. They do not answer any of our specific link analysis about how this, or our uniqueness analysis about how both sides of the aisle already support this. This has White House approval and it's brought to the Senate floor this week. This is just too specific for you to be able to answer. But now going on to the internal link analysis. First argument, you say that we are already targeting people in the status quo. The problem is that we are only allowed to be able to do airstrikes in the status quo. Also, we would indicate that an international coalition is not possible in the status quo. You don't answer our internal link analysis that says that Lieutenant General David Barner has already indicated that United States troop approval is the only thing that is going to be able to allow an international coalition of Jordan, Turkey, as well as the EU to be able to come together to be able to fight ISIS, because they don't believe that the United States has the hegemonic power in the status quo without a true presence in that area. The next argument is that the United States troop presence is key. The first argument is that U.S. troops are the best trained, which means that they are the ones who are the best to be able to go and fight ISIS. Second argument is that they have the most experience, because specifically within special operations such as what took down Osama bin Laden. The next argument is that U.S. troops also have the best access to technology, which means that we can be able to support those other countries who want to be able to cooperate with us in an international coalition, because they don't necessarily have the best technology to be able to identify those ISIS combatants. The next argument is that the United States is the best at creating coalition between local and police forces. The empiric is Iraq, because after Iraq and Afghanistan, we were able to restructure the Iraqi military to be able to fight against ISIS. They are just not able to do it themselves because they don't have the technology in the status quo, which means that we are critical to be able to go in there to have an actual troop presence. The next argument you make is how other powers check, but the United Kingdom, Turkey, and the EU as a whole have already indicated that they are going to do anything unless the United States brings in a troop presence. This is our first argument on the internal link analysis, that an international coalition is not going to happen without the United States. The next argument you make is how ISIS is already being taken care of, but we would indicate that they are the #1 threat to Middle Eastern stability, and you don't answer our argument that other terror groups are already supporting them, which means that the violence that occurs because of this, specifically we would indicate that ISIS violence is now going over to Israel, which means that Israel is thinking about first striking them, which leads to miscalculation, because no one knows who is fighting who, because so many Middle Eastern powers will be fighting, which leads to U.S. and China getting involved. This will happen much long before economic collapse happens, because economic collapse won't happen in a day, but rather this fighting can lead to a first strike by Israel, which will happen immediately.
Alright, it will be an overview of politics is that case.
Anywhere you'd like me to flow
At the top of politics, or wherever on that sheet is convenient for you. Look, this ad turns and outweighs 100% of the case. The PMR is going to go for these time frame arguments about why Hillary Clinton will win the election, meaning that their plan is inevitable. This is problematic in a world in which the AUMF was introduced onto the floor this last week. This means that even if Hillary Clinton will win the election, the Democrats will take the House and the Senate, it does not matter. They will, in a world of the plan, the AUMF will not happen. When they are conceding the specifics of our link story and only make these arguments about why Hillary Clinton will win, This means that one, we win the probability debate, but two, when they concede arguments specifically stating, when they concede our arguments about how this is already on the floor, they've lost the time frame debate. Grant is making great arguments coming out of the Grant is making great arguments coming out of the MG, where he isolates that their impact story is one, not going to happen overnight, but two, is already happening. It's an easy vote for Washburn on the politics dissent. However,
Also, our econ arguments on the union is at least give some suspect to how fast an economic collapse would actually occur. Unemployment is so low. How would that be able to actually collapse the entirety of the United States economy?
Exactly. Grant's arguments on the econ impact are actually pretty good at putting in suspect the actual impact itself. Because in a world in which unemployment has already fallen, at what point do we see economic collapse? Already. Go to the politics part. The only argument that they can go for on this entire sheet of paper is the fact that Hillary will win the election. But I think I do a pretty good job in my overview explaining why this does not matter. However, the other argument that they can go for is the fact that the United States and other forces are already responding to ISIS. But one, we are giving you pretty good analysis coming out of the LOC, exactly explaining why United States ground troops are uniquely key to fighting back the ISIS threat. Additionally, when you compare the impacts of economic collapse and a terrorist attack, you're going to find that the negative is way ahead on this because in a world in which we do not have a strategic outline of the AUMF, we will not have coalitions, which means that we cannot stop terrorism that's happening in the status quo. When you compare the time frame, terrorism is happening now. However, economic collapse is not going to happen for quite some time, as Grant points out in the MOC. Anything else on politics, Grant?
In the news, several sources have said that if the United States doesn't come out with an outlined strategy against ISIS, no one will join us.
Okay, yeah, there have been multiple political analysis. You can literally that have stated multiple nations have stated that if the United States does not have a strategic outline, they will not form coalitions. We are isolating that the mixture of United States ground troops is one, absolutely key to coalitions, but two, it's uniquely critical to fighting back the ISIS threat. Because we have the U.S. ground troops have the best ability to push them back. When you do the impact calculus, not only are we winning the time frame, they're conceding our own lead story, which means we have a probability. We're winning the probability. However, the most important facet in today's debate, besides time frame, is also magnitude. Not only does a terrorist attack turn the case because it makes their impacts inevitable, but it probably also outweighs because it happens a lot faster, which means that even in a world in which you believe their act is inevitable, this dissat happens first, which means that you are going to vote negative. Go to the case. There's one argument we need on the case to win this round, and it's our trade-off term. The only argument that the MGC makes is the fact that they don't link to this, and that they want the big banks to backlash. This is problematic, because in a world in which the FDIC focus is gone and big banks backlash, this means that big banks will be out of control. They're conceding the specific nuance of this coming out of the LOC, where we isolate that in a world in which not only business confidence goes down, but in a world without FDIC protections. This means that big banks will have the ability to not only manipulate individuals, but also commit the same fraud practices that led to the 2008 collapse. Yes.
The BizCon argument amplifies this because they don't answer that this would steal away business from them.
The BizCon argument amplifies this because they do not answer the argument that low business and that this would steal business away from businesses.
Okay, so the order is a brief float overview. I want it on a new sheet. Or you can just put it on the background page on the PMC or whatever. Then the BizCon dissat briefly, politics, and then case. Is anyone not ready?
We're good.
Okay. UT Tyler GM wins in this debate room for a few main reasons. First, gut check. They're going for this terrorism argument, and they're saying literally no one else is going to do anything about ISIS if the U.S. doesn't do anything. First of all, other countries are already doing it. Seth does a pretty stellar job of telling you that that's the case. Also, people aren't just going to ignore ISIS, right? Gut check them on this argument. The PMC is not causing us to not do anything, and other countries also will do things without the U.S. being involved. That's literally all they're going for coming out of the LOR. Don't let them have that. Next, remember that we are winning on probability because they're literally telling you that business confidence is the most important, and then they're dropping our warrants coming out of the PMC that business confidence declines when we do not make this reform to allow debit card swipes to be charged by these small businesses, because then loans can no longer be given out. They will be given out at more expensive rates, or these small banks will go out of business altogether and people won't be able to get loans because they never answer the fact that big banks are not opening new branches to take place of these smaller banks. They're neglecting way too many warrants in this debate round. We're also winning on time frame because they simply say that an economic downturn will not happen overnight, but terrorism is happening now. They don't answer the fact that terrorism is also being fought right now by other countries, and that the U.S. is not the determinant factor for fighting ISIS. Also, they completely ignore the fact that these small banks are losing 12% of income currently now, and that's a lot for a small bank, right? It stops people from investing, and that's another key reason why the economy is going to be hurt, right? They're never answering the PMC, and we're winning magnitude because we're controlling the nuclear war scenario in this round. They literally just say terrorism is what caused the nuclear war because miscalculation, things like that, but they're not doing enough work for you. Go to the business confidence dissad. Literally all they do is extend a few arguments. They say to take out our uniqueness, but remember they say that like a bunch of jobs were added and consumer credit is going up. This isn't specific to small businesses and how small businesses are affecting, and how like this is going to lead to a decline like in the long run, and it's not going to take as long as they think, but also they're like other people are taking care of ISIS. Yeah, what's up?
You can see the plan. You can see the plan controls the internal link to the dissad. You cannot get like the 3 arguments you picked out of it whenever you don't have access to the impact level.
Controls the internal links to the dissad. They can't get these arguments when they don't have access to the dissad level. Also, literally the only other thing they have on the sheet is that we're stealing businesses from large banks. First of all, no, we're not. Large banks are stealing businesses from small banks, or no business is taking place because
There was no response to that link.
You re-articulate the argument that we steal businesses away from smaller banks and make it a huge thing in your negative block. It did not come out that way in the LOC. All I had is that banks are preying on small
argument
businesses,
wasn't even
not
on
banks.
that flow until this last speech. It was on a different flow, and we responded to it.
That was in the shell of the LOC.
Yeah, no, I have that in the TIGs, not on the BizCon.
Yeah, I had it on a different flow.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So I'm just like,
So what argument do you think she's responding to specifically?
Our third link that indicates that they would steal business away from larger banks and they would be forced to hike rates because of that.
Okay, yeah, I do have that as unresponded to.
okay.
Okay, cross-play the answers up on
Yeah, okay. So from there, just remember they're not responding to the fact that these small banks are going out of business. This is extended by Seth, and then larger banks are not opening up new branches in this area, which means no business is taking place. That is conceded coming out of the PMC.
Also, it's happening in the SCO, that's the internal link argument.
Yeah, also it's happening in the status quo. That's the internal link argument. Okay, now onto the politics decide. Where do you want me to
No,
go?
answer case first.
Oh, pretty sure.
Yeah, extend across solvency.
Okay, go to the case, go to the case. Extend across solvency. They're conceding a vast majority of our solvency. Remember that removing this cap makes small banks profitable again. If we don't do that, then they will continue to go out of business. This allows them to grant things like free checking, which draws people in and incentivizes small banks to start opening up again.
They don't say like that we specify which purchases make. That's new. We don't need to specify. I can read another spec sheet if you
Wait,
want.
what?
They say like we don't say which purchases people make. There's
Yeah,
not
they say that we don't say what purchases people make. Literally coming out of the PMC, I tell you that they could charge like $1 for someone spending $100, right? That's something that is said. We explain it very thoroughly, and they literally just say that people in rural communities are poor, so it's not going to be enough. But once again, these are small banks. Second, it's probably problematic to say that everyone who lives in a rural community is poor. And third,
on the trade-off turn, extend across plain solves, they concede that.
yeah, on the trade-off turn, extend across that plan solves, they concede that.
And then on politics, just
Okay,
read
so
this one here.
So on politics specifically, they talk about boots on the ground. These aren't needed because remember they don't articulate why airstrikes aren't enough. Gut check this, but also remember that the boots on the ground supercharge like what's going on, right? So like we can, like U.S. isn't the only one who's going to be taking action in this scenario, right? Other countries will be doing this. Is that right?
Oh, that's opposition. You saw it.
Yeah, other nations will still be fighting. Just gut check the fact that we're not just going to let ISIS run rampant. At the end of the day, that's the argument they're going for. Terrorism leading to miscalculation. We are obviously winning on this, so it doesn't matter if you think we're winning on time frame or anything else. But aside from that, What?
Also, they don't understand the analysis I gave you on the ticks. Mitch McConnell did bring it to Congress, but there is going to be no
Yeah,
debate
they
on it
don't
until after
understand the
election.
analysis Seth gives you on politics. Mitch McConnell himself, they say that he says this is one of the most important issues. He has also said that there will be no important votes taking place until after the election,
Like,
right?
So
there's nothing on the docket right now. It's not going to take place. We're winning on time frame. Even if you don't buy that, it is like they do not get access to their nuclear war scenario because it's not like we're just going to let ISIS run rampant, and they're conceding way too.
I don't believe that the argument that it's not on the docket was made.
Yo, I told you that Mitch McConnell has said in the MG that there's going to be no big debate until after the election because, like, there's nothing in their agenda that could possibly sway the election.
It seems like the only problematic term or phrasing in this framing is that whether or not it actually exists on the congressional docket or not.
Okay.
I think that's what they have a problem with, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess.
I'm just gonna
reframe that.
Okay.
explain what the point of order was right there. It's like, that's the problem, is whether or not it is on the docket is new.
Okay. They're relying on words from Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell himself has said that there will not be any big votes until the election. So they've conceded way too much to win.